Alrighty, folks. Thank you very much for joining this episode of the Schusterian Logic Podcast. Today, I'm very excited because I have Aaron Hayslip from Parsity, and actually got introduced to him and his organization back in 2019. Before where I met Aaron, and actually with Project Shift and his organization, I'd never really taken mentorship seriously, or at least it wasn't something that I considered to be like a passion of mine. And really, Project Shift is the thing that really got me super into that, and now clearly continuing forward here. So Aaron has founded Parsity, and he actually has a very long history with Bootcamps, longer than I think most people actually know, to go through. So I think we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. So Aaron, thank you very much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me, man. This is really exciting.
Yeah, this is awesome. So let's start with that. So really, I guess for people here, particularly because when I think of boot camps, I think of them getting really big in the last few years, right? Or at least, they existed beforehand, but I think of them as kind of like they were really big the last 5 years, and now they're starting to grow, and you see it a lot on LinkedIn. But your history with it is a bit longer than that. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I went through, I guess if you want me to tell that story
Please.
Yeah. So I went through, I consider it an early boot camp, probably. I don't know if you want to think about waves. I think the kind of the first boot camp was Dev Boot Camp.
Mm-hmm.
And they obviously shut down a few years ago, 2017, I think, right after the Iron Yard shut down. I think they shut down.
Mm-hmm.
I think they were like one of the first early models. I want to say like a year or so after they started. The one I went to, this was, I always get my dates mixed up. I think I always say 2012,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it was really around 2013.
Okay.
This was Austin, Texas. And yeah, the funny thing is one of the guys who started that boot camp, named Harsh Patel.
Mm-hmm.
I was in I think their third cohort, so still very small back
Right.
then. No one in Austin or anywhere knew what a coding boot camp was, for better or worse. I think there's a good side to no one knowing what those were. There was no negative experiences. For me, I'm gonna get back to Harsh. But for me, I graduated school with a religious studies degree, kind of always thinking about coding and tech and design and those sort of things, but thinking of those things as skills. And I thought, college is a place where I want to use my brain. I want to have debates. So I went to a small private university where read lots of books, wrote lots of essays, and had lots of debates in these small classes of 5 to 10 students, which was really great. But then when I graduated, I was like, oh, I should actually get a real job. And it was time to finally get those skills so I could actually make money and get a real job. Coding quickly became the thing for me. Went through this code school, graduated, got a job very quickly at a startup. And I was just amazed and enamored by the process, because I was sitting next to some other guys that went to college at the same time I did. They went to UT, got computer science degrees, had to do calculus, all of that. And they're sitting next to me. They were a little bit ahead of me, but we're on a similar trajectory as far as career path and our salaries and all that. And I was just kind of laughing that I got to skip all of that because I would have died if I had to do calculus. But yeah, then Maker Square, it's funny. It's that code school in itself probably tells the story pretty well of the way code schools have grown since then. So I actually recently talked to Harsh. He's going to be on our podcast next month.
Oh,
but they sold Maker Square, I think, for $3 million to Hack Reactor, because they had just scaled up beyond Austin. They went to New York, and then I think San Francisco, and I think Chicago. Then they sold to Hack Reactor, and then Hack Reactor made him CEO of that. And then a few years later, I think Hack Reactor sold to Galvanize for, don't quote me on this, it's on his website, but for like $15 million. And then Galvanize made him CEO of that thing. And then I think Galvanize ended up, I think this was last year or fairly recently, they sold to a big, education company for like 120 something million. And now he's doing something different. But it's crazy to look at that trajectory of code schools and to realize how much the space has evolved. And there's been many different phases of how code schools have operated and trends and all that kind of stuff.
right.
It's happened.
I mean, when I first became aware of coding academies was when I was studying data science back in, I think it must have been 2013 or 2014, around that time. And I was looking to get into, you know, data science really. Like I knew a little bit of Python, but I really wanted to, like, that's what I thought, you know, my future was. And I actually found like a boot camp in, you know, I think it was San Francisco area where it was data science. And actually at that point, and we've talked about this before, where it's like they actually posted their, you know, post graduation, you know, placement rates, right? And it was something like 92%. And they posted salaries and everything. It was really compelling. I mean, especially back then, it was like you're in the Bay Area, but like you're, you know, 92% placement, 100 and something, you know, 120,000 immediately, you know, to get a job. It's like that's not bad, especially for somebody who has no experience in technology and they're willing to take you. So like that was my first idea was there. But that's the thing. I lived in, you know, Indianapolis, and I was considering, you know, moving out to San Francisco. So there was nothing in the area that was even close to that. Like the first one that I was really aware of in Indianapolis was 1150 Academy, which was a not-for-profit started by, oh God, I can't think of his name. He's huge. He's big in Indianapolis, but he started Cha-Cha and a bunch of other companies. But basically that was his not-for-profit. But like that was like the first one in the area. And now they're everywhere. You know, if I want to do a data science boot camp, I could look at my back door and I can find one.
Yeah. It's crazy how much, and I think in a good way, right? It doesn't seem like in the last couple of years, like the notion that you need a computer science degree has all but died. You know, I mean, I know it's very alive in some larger companies, but I think early on, whenever I was working, you know, as part of the whole code school world, it was a huge pushback from potential employers. And it was a huge pushback from potential students too. They just couldn't believe that you wouldn't need a computer science degree, but I haven't heard anybody gripe about that in a long time.
No, I mean, that's the thing. IBM officially dropped the official need for a college degree, period. Like you can have a high school degree, but even like computer science, I mean, like that's the thing, like, you know, computer science or equivalent experience. And honestly, like when I had when I did the event with 2U and I had my 3 boot camp folks here who have been very successful in our organization, they've all been successful. It was always like nothing in their background looks anything like computer science. It was all on the job training, boot camps, and that side of it. So yeah, I mean, like, and I guess that's maybe discipline domain or domain specific, because like there are some jobs, for example, like I know like inside of IBM, like there are certain roles where like, especially as you go up the degrees where it's, don't officially need like an MBA, for example, but it's still very heavily needed. But at least on the computer science side, it's mostly evaporated. You know, I can't.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is, you know, I remember back when I graduated from a boot camp, it was really up in the air, like whether or not grads were successful. One of the things I heard a lot is, oh, maybe you'll last for a year and then you're going to not be doing this anymore because there's just no way that you have the right foundation to make it long-term as a boot camp grad, as a software engineer.
Oh, wow.
But I started thinking about it. I think I saw some post on LinkedIn even this week, you know, alluding to something similar. And I just started thinking through like all the grads at Project Shift that got software engineering jobs. And I was like, I can't think of a single one of them that are not still software engineers. You know, I just don't think that's just not true, you know, like.
Yeah. It's actually interesting because when I look at the people who I guess don't cut it, I guess might be the term. First off, I can't think of any in my experience that have done that. They've all been successful. But even if they don't, like being on the technical side of the house sets it up so phenomenally well everywhere else that it might, I mean, like they didn't get what they want, but they got something very, very good. I mean, even in IBM, like, because IBM had a history for the last, you know, few decades, I guess, getting non-technical managers, I guess. I'm not sure if that was their goal, but that's ended up what ended up happening to them. And now they're just at a point where it's like they want people who know both, and they just cannot find it. So like any of the grads who decide they do technology for 3 years, like, technology is not for me, I move over to a business or a project management side or something else, they are going to be so well set up because they can just talk to the damn developers.
Well, we had a student, one cohort, who kind of toward the end of the program was talking to us, and he sort of had like, I can't remember, to be honest with you, account management, some kind of business background. I don't think he made a ton of money, but he kind of came to us and said, I don't think I want to be a software engineer. And I was sort of like gutted, like, oh my gosh, like you just did this whole thing to not become a software engineer. He's like, yeah, but I think my skills are still going to be very helpful. And a couple of weeks later, he got hired at IBM, actually, making six figures, above what a lot of our software engineering grads are making. And he was just so happy. And I was like, yeah, okay, this is amazing. I guess there are other paths where, being an able-bodied software engineer would improve your career, even if you're not going to be a developer.
Oh yeah, I mean, like just the talent stack addition of just being, I call it tech savvy, but really just understanding software patterns, just understanding what it's capable of. Just the number of people who just don't know what a reasonable request is, or to understand that side of the house there. I mean, because like, okay, I don't want to get too far into this, but I think it's worth saying. So when I first started as a software developer, and I went self-taught, I didn't have any boot camp, so I kind of went through the bushes, to get there. And I remember sitting in a room with a bunch of software developers, and I had just started, and like I had a problem where it's like I wanted to remove technical debt from our organization. We were slow, we had a bunch of issues, so it's like, let's remove technical debt. So I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of developers, and then all of a sudden I say, okay, well, why don't we start by documenting the system? It's not documented. Let's go and do that. And all of a sudden, one of the developers chimed in and said, well, Brian, that's a lot harder than you think. There's 3 levels of documentation. And he's basically rattled off a bunch of stuff. And all of a sudden he got done, and I just sat there. And usually I would have been like, oh, I don't know what I'm asking. And then, but like I'd known enough now to realize that he's screwing with me here. Maybe maybe he doesn't have attention, but I know that he just threw all that stuff in. We didn't get anywhere closer to a solution. We didn't get to a part where it got clear. And so that happens a lot too. A lot of the non-technical folks, I mean, and I'll see like really big business people, like people who are real power, get afraid in front of the technical people where they'll back off. But if you have the ability to just pierce through that a little bit, you can go and say, that's bullshit. Why don't you come back with a different answer? I don't know what it is, but I know it's not that. So why don't you try stop screwing me and get me a better answer?
I love that.
Yeah. So it's just absolutely, it's such an essential stack, particularly if you're into technology, or even if you're not, just knowing what's capable. So that's a very, it's an interesting use case there. So, all right. So you went through the early boot camp phases. You were like at the, maybe not ground zero, but pretty close. At least for Austin, it seemed like you're at ground zero.
Yeah, definitely.
And you ended up finding one of the guys who ended up being hired away as made CEO. That sounds like a wonderful career trajectory. So okay, so take me through the transition of you being in development. You've been doing that. Then you decide, hey, let's start a boot camp. Like, what was that story like?
Well, I think I always was interested in entrepreneurship, but again, graduating with a degree in religious studies, I just wasn't part of that world at all. Like that wasn't my people. I didn't know anyone in tech. I mean, I had friends from college that were in tech. I think at the time, the 3-day startup was starting to become like a thing around Austin, where some of the UT students would participate in this kind of like hackathon thing where you start a startup. So I knew about that, but I was very much on the outside looking in. And then suddenly I got hired, and the company was called Mass Relevance. And the thing that we were known for, I was like barely part of it, maybe for a year, was putting like tweets on TV. So anytime you saw like the Super Bowl or the Grammy or something like that, there was a stream of Twitter that we curated and then displayed for brands to kind of promote themselves on big events and stuff like that. So it was really cool. And we were like ground floor of a building downtown Austin. We had a kegerator and beer and cheese and wine parties like every week. And there was a massage room and there was a fitness trainer. And it was crazy because my wife, she was working as a teacher, and she's like griping that she has to buy her own whiteboard markers. I'm looking at her, I'm like, you do something that's 10 times more legitimate and helpful to the world than what I do. I literally design and build these little things that show tweets on TV.
I don't know, man. Keeping 4chan tweets off of the NFL channel seems like a pretty important job to me.
Yeah, it's not molding young minds necessarily, though. But yeah, so I really felt like I had this newfound sense of, and I've used these big words before, been kind of made fun of by colleagues of mine in the past. Like I feel like I had hope, like I had like a hope. I felt like I was part of something bigger than myself. Like I honestly, I went through a season of, this was shortly after I got married, which was around a couple of years before I went through the boot camp. I went through like a season of depression. And I think a lot of it was just centered around the fact that a lot of my friends were getting cool jobs. And I, at this point, was I was parking cars in the service department of a Honda dealership for $9 an hour. Like literally the only, I applied for 60 jobs with my college degree, and I don't even want to say how much my college degree cost. It got me a $9 an hour job at a Honda dealership. So when I got a job as a software engineer, it just kind of blew my mind that like I went from that to this. These people wouldn't have like looked at me or even talked to me a few weeks ago. And now here I am. And then, of course, I realize also now that despite like a ton of privilege that, is on my side, being a young white dude in Austin, Texas, that I still had this feeling of, wow, that was transformation. And so
right.
that kind of in line with this idea of, I've always wanted to start a startup, made me start thinking maybe I could start this same kind of model, because this was amazing. Just the opportunity to be able to invest in people, which is something I was really passionate about. So another long story, but I'll try to make it short. My wife and I had really wanted to move overseas, just move abroad, have an adventure together, do something different. And we ended up moving to Tel Aviv, Israel, because long story, my wife had citizenship through her parents. Her family lived there when she was really young. And so it was just the one place that we could get super easy visa access. And Tel Aviv is like Silicon Valley, but even more intense. It's amazing. And so that was really the idea of, what if we go to Tel Aviv and start a code school? And I was really passionate about helping, kind of the other countries around Israel or in the periphery with figuring out what could they do as far as learning how to code as well. So that was kind of the big vision. So I had support from, the folks at Maker Square, who I told them about this idea, and they were like, man, we love that. Whatever we can do to help kind of like guide you. So they would give me a call like once a month and just kind of coach me through that process. So we moved to Tel Aviv. We started this code school, and that was probably my like grind period of life, because literally I found this as a tech startup in Tel Aviv. It was two people. They had raised like, I don't know, maybe a couple $100,000, pocket change for what they envisioned.
Right.
And they were kind of trying to start basically the General Assembly. That was like their business model was, we want to be General Assembly for Israel and Europe. And so they were like teaching some digital marketing classes, some part-time stuff. And it was really pretty hodgepodge. And so I came in and said, hey, I'll start a code school for you. I can't legally work in Israel. But if you pay my LLC in Texas, then I can just kind of hang around here. You can contract me out.
Right.
And we kind of cut a deal. I helped get some investment as well. And I was, very in over my head. Like when I say stuff like getting investment, I didn't know what I was talking about. Literally, I had washed cars, parked cars, was a software engineer for a year, and then I was doing this. And so what it looked like is, for a season leading up to the launch of our first class of 12 students in Tel Aviv, I was just up all night, every night for months on end, just making curriculum up. Like we wanted to teach Angular and Node. I didn't know Angular and Node. So I was like literally going online, building apps, trying to figure it out, going through tutorials, and then going over here and trying to write some curriculum for it. It wasn't the most polished thing, obviously, off the bat, but almost immediately, most of our first class of students got jobs. And wow. I was blown away. And that's still an interesting fact about how the code school world works. I still am surprised by how quickly people get jobs. Literally, a guy today who graduated maybe a week and a half ago got a job. I think he doubled his salary, and just out of nowhere, so all that to say, I think I was just, it was kind of magical. It was a ton of hard work. But I think there was something special about me being kind of not having that expertise gap, right? I was kind of learning it as I was teaching it.
Mm-hmm.
And that helped break things down more. Whereas if I had been, a developer for 10 years or something like that, I don't know that I would have been able to translate, that to new beginners. So I'm kind of blabbing now, but there's a lot more after that. But that was kind of the original experience.
I get that. Okay, wasn't quite where I was expecting it to go. So okay, so you got in about a couple years. So what year was this roughly? 2014, 2015?
Yeah, we moved to Israel in 2015. 2015.
Okay. Now, what was the name of was this Project Shift, like the precursor to it?
No, this was called Elevation Academy.
Elevation Academy. Okay.
Yeah. And yeah, so the kind of the transition story there was everything was going okay, right? I mean, it was really hard to run a code school, especially in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily everyone spoke English, which was great because I didn't speak Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
But we found out that my wife's mom was diagnosed with ALS.
Oh.
And we kind of just had planned to live in Israel we didn't have an end date in mind. We loved it. Like, we enjoyed it. My wife had made some great friends with a bunch of women in Tel Aviv. She kind of created this hodgepodge group of women who the normal thing to do in Israel is to put your kid like in school when they're like 3 months old.
Oh.
So my wife was kind of renegade and like, no, I'm going to keep my kid home with me for a while. So she created this mom group on Facebook, and a lot of international women, a lot of Israeli women would come. And it was funny because I think we found out just how small the Tel Aviv community was. There was this lady that would come. One of the stories that I think is really cool. There's this woman that would come to her group and bring her kid, and our kids would play and all that. And my wife noticed that she was posting all this stuff about Waze on her Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife just trying to make conversation like, oh, does your husband work at Waze? Like my husband, he's like a software engineer, kind of works in startups too. And she's like, yeah. He started that. She's like, wait, he started what? He started Waze? She's like, yeah. And like, we go look him up.
That's super casual. That's real like damn casual.
The guy who like wrote the software and started Waze and sold it to Google for however much. I'm like, babe, have you been to their apartment? Is it really nice? I mean,
I just love that factor, like how spouses and family just don't see you any differently. You can make so much or whatever to your family. You're just dopey old dad,
Old dad. Yeah, that's so true. But anyway, so we ended up moving to North Carolina where we are now.
Right.
Because that's where my in-laws were. And just in that season decided, what, nothing else matters but being close to family.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really disappointed. I didn't know how I was going to provide for my family. I hadn't been a software engineer in a while, to be honest. I didn't have a lot of software engineering experience before. I think I was really put in a pressure cooker, though. I knew 10x what I knew before from goodness, teaching it, and then having students from every perspective ask me questions about it. And so I remember this process. I applied for one job because I looked around at the companies in Raleigh and in Durham, and I tried to find a company that was like the cool company I worked for in Austin, and just realized the startup scene was a little different looking. I found Pendo and interviewed, and I got an offer, and I was like, oh, cool. This was literally the only place I applied, and I got an offer.
One for one.
I'm one for one. I was like, that must mean that it's easy for me to get a job. Like I've got good skills. It's easy for me to get a job. And so, I like to pretend like it was me convincing my wife to like let me start something else, but really it was her being like, you're not going to be excited about your work unless you get to start something else. And so in my way, it was for me like a ticket of saying, okay, well, if I try to start something else and it bites the dust, I could always go to work at a place like Pendo, which would be freaking awesome. Pendo is so great. I still think they're great. Wow. And so, that was kind of the birth of Project Shift.
Oh, well, excellent. Well, that's quite interesting. So you think that if you didn't get an offer from Pendo, do you think it would have ended the same way? Like, let's say they said no.
I haven't thought about that. It's such a a myth now. I mean, not that like it's like that big of a deal,
Right.
but it's such a narrative now that I don't actually remember what I felt like back then. I like to tell the story now. Like then I had my ticket to
Right.
be able to start a startup risk free, but I don't know if I thought about it like that back then or not. My guess is I probably would have just still been a little less confident, but still started a startup.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, because I know for me, like when I was going back to the job search after the VC firm, basically after 2018, like there was this sense where it's like I got started, and it was rough, basically, where it's like I just could not get a job, and I was just not in the right frame of mind. A lot of that learning now goes into what I help teach people, what I help teach your students, how to get a job and go into that. But for me, it was rough. So by the time I actually got my shit together and actually moved in the right direction, I got offers from IBM, IQVIA, a few others, and it's like, okay, now it makes sense. But for me, I felt lucky to get it. You would almost seemed like you applied to one job, you got it, and you're like, oh, this is easy.
Yeah. I mean, who knows all the different variables that were at play with that,
I understand. So, all right. So you started Project Shift, and now you're at Parsity. So, okay. So I do want to jump into kind of your philosophy with boot camps and the direction you go in, how you go through. So right now, I guess you would say you're kind of a purposely, not that your goal is to be small, but basically you have kind of smaller cohorts with the group you go to. You have intensity.
Yeah.
So how do you distinguish yourself as different than just any other boot camp? What do you try to do to build a better experience for your students?
Yeah. Well, I think, man, there's a lot. I think there's two things I want to say. One is I believe if you have the right people, like the right students, that there are probably a lot of paths that are going to work out for you.
Mm-hmm.
I think the process for learning how to code to the point of being able to land a software engineering job is very, 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 very hard and complex. Like I think that few people can do it on their own. But it's not like some code schools have the magic formula and some don't, right?
Mm-hmm.
If people are able to be disciplined and have a path and have accountability and have support, I think most every code school that is genuinely trying and knows what they're doing could probably output successful graduates.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just been my experience, right? I didn't have a secret formula whenever I started this code school in Israel, and suddenly people got jobs. Same thing with Project Shift, people got jobs. And I even remember, but kind of the transition coming from Israel to Durham, I was interviewing with Block, which is a code school, online code school. They got bought by Thankful. And so they were like at the time the largest online code school. So kind of like did what Parsy's doing now before it was in vogue,
Right.
And I remember talking with their head of curriculum, and I was a mentor for them for a little while, and just realized, man, no offense, but they had no idea what they're doing. I mean, not that they didn't have any idea what they're doing, but they weren't writing curriculum that was any better than the stuff that I had put together in Tel Aviv. So I think that was one thing that I realized through this whole process is it's important to find the right people, the right students, right? And I think the very first podcast I put out for our podcast was essentially this idea that the largest factor to your success is like who you are when you start a code school, right? If you're an adult who has your stuff together, who enjoys programming, you get excited about building stuff, yada yada. We can repeat the same things that we probably repeat all the time on LinkedIn and podcasts like this and stuff. But I think you're probably going to do well, if you just don't quit and you have the resources. So the rest of it is there's a lot of variables though in the code school world, right? Between like high tuition, ISAs, in person, remote, 16 weeks, 24 weeks, 12 weeks, 10 weeks. What do you know before you go in? Is it JavaScript, Python, Ruby on? I mean, there's just so much stuff that's happening in the code school world. Most of it is changes who can access the program, right? And then kind of like how many of those people who do go through the program will actually be successful. Those are kind of like the things you're playing with. So I've kind of evolved, honestly, over time. I'd say with Project Shift, Sean, who I want to make a shout out to, right? He came in kind of beside me. He was in a part-time role for most of the time, but he came in and really helped me shape some of what we were doing with well, I mean, a lot of what we were doing, obviously, with Project Shift, he shaped that with me. And together, our philosophy was sort of, we wanted to be, I don't want to say the Harvard of code schools, because it sounds kind of dumb, but but we wanted to be small. Like, we didn't care about making a ton of money. That was never our focus. It was like, we want to see massive transformations in a few people's lives, right? We wanted to play our part in making a dent in the world. We want to be able to be, ironically, being a couple white dudes, about diversity, because I think there's a opportunity for this alternative education to help the tech world do what it seems to be trying to do, which is to diversify its workforce. And so, but I think part of that, what I lost, was how to run a business.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, and that's what really gets me back to like the philosophy of code schools I'm at now, which is, we charge at our high point with Project Shift $25,000, which is, I mean, I every bit think it's worth it, because of the we even like polled the students at one point, asked them what their return on investment they thought it would be. And, most of them were in the hundreds of thousands of positive ROI on a $25,000 education, learning to become a software engineer. So it wasn't that we were upset about charging that, but it was that we never could make money from doing that. Like Project Shift either broke even or lost money every year. And that wasn't important to us until we realized that if you're going to be a business, which again, even if your mission in life and your goal is to do good, right? And to help others, and to whatever the term impact you want to use, I think the best vehicle is business, not a nonprofit necessarily. And so if you're going to be a business, you have to figure out how to make profit, because cash is the lifeblood of your business, right? I mean, it enables you to keep your mission going and to expand it and to impact more. So I think what I realized then was, all right, scale isn't the enemy, right? Because I saw these other code schools, like the Iron Yard is a great example, who, if you were to ask Iron Yard grads in 2015 what they were like, what the Iron Yard was like, I think you'd get great raving reviews. Mm-hmm. The Iron Yard that I saw whenever I first came to Durham was not the Iron Yard you'd want to go to, mm-hmm. As far as like, hey, anyone can come. There's no real admissions, whatever you want to do. Yeah, cool. As long as you pay the money, that's awesome. Whatever happens to you afterwards, we're going to provide some services, but it is what it is. So all to say, I wanted to go against that, but I kind of realized that in some ways, scale and growth means sustainability, more than just a couple of folks getting rich. I think I saw those stories about these code school founders getting rich, but having students who failed so often, and that was difficult for me. So yeah, another long story here, I guess.
Yeah.
So with Parsity, I didn't mean to stumble upon the way we're doing things now, right? Like, this wasn't intentional to have the model that we have now. And to kind of tell that story, it was 2020. I think it was August. I went on vacation, and family vacation. It was planned for a long time. I think we were all at Project Shift burnout, because we were all doing everything at that point.
Yeah.
The pandemic, and we were doing everything via Zoom. Like, we were teaching on Zoom, like live, like hours on hours every day, which makes you want to kill yourself. And so I came back from vacation, and like half the students were gone. And it wasn't because, I'll be honest, it wasn't because they were like disgruntled. It had nothing to do with the program. They just had life stuff, right? And that was the story of the year. Like, people had their spouses got laid off who were supposed to support them during the program. They couldn't rely on their jobs. It was just a mess. And so from a business perspective, what I realized is like, okay, people don't want the premium model right now, right? Project Shift was the premium model. They want the value model. They want what's going to enable them to get to the next step the easiest way possible, without quitting their job, without putting their spouse out of work, whatever.
Right.
So that's when I started thinking about Parsity. And yeah, the original goal was just to try to make it as cheap as possible, to be honest, but not sacrifice any of the quality. So as far as tuition goes, because I have a whole gripe about ISAs and all the other creative stuff that I think
hope we have enough time to get to that, but we may We may have to meet on your podcast and gripe about that or do something. I'm quite enjoying this. But that's interesting. So, okay, I think that's one of the quotes I'll have to get out of this. So really, it was trying to figure out how can we go as cheap as possible, possible, without sacrificing what makes a code bootcamp valuable.
Yeah. Because it's about accessibility for the students. Like, what would make this more accessible for you? A flexible schedule. Cool. We could probably figure that out. Cheaper. I mean, these are all just problems to solve, right? I mean, enough smart people could, I would think, I'm not the only one, Thinkful does something similar, could probably figure out how to make this low cost, but have the same results. And so that was the idea.
Interesting. That's really interesting. Okay. Yeah, actually that goes into another subject here that I wanted to talk about. It's an article you recently got me involved in, and now I'm on the Sahil party bus basically at this point, where I pre-ordered his signed book. I've read his articles, so I'm like, I'm on it because I'm really about it. Sahil. So if you don't know Sahil, I don't know what his last name is, but he was the founder of Gumroad. Like a decade ago, he wrote a tweet that said, "I'm going to start $1 billion company," and then proceeded to do not that entirely, but had a very interesting time along with it, where basically he laid off all his employees. But what was amazing is that the company basically grew the entire time. There was even when it went down to zero, there was hardly a dip, and so it kind of changed how he did business and how he thought about things. And so, like, he wrote an article in 2018 that was related to his transition into that, how he, what he learned about being an entrepreneur. Funny enough, the article he wrote, I learned from him, that came out the same exact day as "No Thank You, Mr. Pecker," which is the Jeff Bezos blackmail Medium article or whatever. It would have been like the top article of that month, but that article just happened to launch at the same day. So anywho, I thought that was funny. So anywho, he came out with this philosophy. It's coming out with a book called The Minimalist Entrepreneur. And no meetings, no deadlines, no full-time employees. So how did that factor, because you introduced me that idea, and I have to imagine it influenced you. So how did that influence your ability to provide the service?
I discovered that article like 3 weeks ago. So probably 2 weeks, probably a week before you and I got together. And it was through, I actually had a Zoom call with Harsh.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not name dropping. But it seems like he just keeps coming up.
Sure.
Harsh with, Maker Square, Hack Reactor, Galvanize, whatever. And he was talking to me, and I was telling him about what I experienced, right? About how our company was doing. And he mentioned that article. He was like, "Look, what you're doing kind of reminds me of this." Yeah. And in my mind, there's a point where Parsity grows, and I have to start hiring full-time employees, which is very difficult. I mean, it's difficult to provide for that. And immediately all of your costs go through the roof, right? I mean, all of our costs, everyone thinks that, with Project Shift that, oh, okay, so now that you're online, you're going to be cheap, right? Because you don't have to pay rent. I was like, rent was definitely expensive, but nothing compared to how much it costs to have full-time employees. And I'm all for, I think, I'm not anti full-time employees. I think obviously, in some ways, that's the best way to develop people, is to have full-time employees. And,
I 100% agree. Yeah.
To cultivate that relationship. What I love about Sahil's post there is he talks about this idea of not having full-time employees in a way to provide complete transparency and flexibility around who works at his company. So basically, he has sort of a policy where he doesn't hire full-time. Everybody's part-time. He posts exactly what you can earn depending on the role that you have. So if you're there for this amount of time, you get paid this much, etc. So I haven't really gone through, my philosophies on all of that. I am all for, especially being in the bootcamp space, like being more transparent than other spaces, because I think bootcamps, they're like the main currency that you roll with as far as relationships with students is trust. Yeah. And so, one of the things that I started doing, which isn't a big deal because I don't think anyone cares about it, but I posted like our roadmap for this quarter, and I'm like, I'll just post. I mean, it's literally just the same document that I have on my computer that tells me, and posted on my wall, like tells me what I'm doing every day. I was like, I'll just post it so everyone knows like what changes are coming. But yeah, I think what's interesting though for the code school space is I can go look online right now, and I can find probably 30 other programs that are the exact same thing, maybe even less than what Parsity's doing, that are $15,000, $20,000, $30,000. And I think the only difference between why theirs costs that much and this costs this much isn't even greed. Like, it isn't even the fact, I don't even think it's that. I think people are so used to operating a business like within this little box that that's the only way you can do it. And never really getting creative about how to automate processes or be more efficient or be more productive or hire out contractors. And so for me so far, it's been by necessity that I'm the only full-time employee,
Right.
And I don't think you'd even realize that if you're a student. I don't know. I don't hide it, but I don't talk about it necessarily either. No one ever asked me, is there any other full-time students? Because the student meets with their mentor whenever they want to meet with their mentor, and the mentor is available. And the experience, it works the way it needs to. But I think this is really enabling me to not have to do things like ISAs, because it's still a big risk. And it's a lot of money to pay $7,000 or $8,000, but it's not $25,000, $30,000.
Right. No, and honestly, what fascinates me about that model in particular is this idea, particularly Sahil's model, is this idea of getting good quality part-time work that gets you experience. Because like one of the things that I've really locked in on, and again, I'll come back and question this as I'm starting to evolve and learn more about boot camps and see if this holds up. But one of the things that I see is that just this lack of demonstrable skills and how it just seems like this giant barrier to be able to go get that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's really fascinating about a model where you have good, solid part-time work is this idea that you can go and do something that's less than a full-time job, but still get paid, but also be working in your industry to do what you need. I mean, honestly, like, the biggest barrier for a lot of people getting into software development is just more the barrier to entry. I mean, literally, you need to be worth six figures. And the absolute truth of it is that most people coming out of boot camps with project work and education just aren't worth that, at least on the technology alone. Usually you can get it through skill stacking, where you take a look at their background and say, there's something interesting about them. Like, the recent hire I did was Michael Curtis, where it's like, he was not super strong technically, but he had enough of a professional background where it's like, this is a good risk. And that's something I've heard very common with people who hired out good boot camp. This is somebody we're willing to take a chance on, that side. So, to do that. So it's like, for me, I want to find, how do you get more opportunities for folks? So even if they can't get that full-time experience, they can start using it, they can start adding that on there. So that's why that idea is interesting to me, because I want to see more people adopt that framework, so that you work part-time at an organization, get paid, and then, do other stuff with the rest of your time.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, I don't know if I can think of hardly any, if any, graduates that have done something like that from Project Shift. So I don't know if that's just something that code school grads aren't doing or thinking of, but I think I'm continually surprised in a good way. And I shouldn't say that I'm surprised by it, but I'm continually surprised in a good way by how quickly our grads are able to land full-time jobs as software engineers, and at the salaries they're landing them at. And I think what it tells me is and this is kind of another thing I think we were talking about that I'm not trying to bring up, but that this idea that there's this huge supply of junior engineers and no job openings is a myth. Like, that's not the experience I've had at all.
Interesting.
Somehow these jobs keep popping up and our grads keep stepping into them full time. And not to say that people haven't had difficulties, for sure, but that's not the experience I've had. That there's an oversupply of juniors and undersupply of positions.
Yeah, I mean, I guess from my position, where I've got that idea, especially at IBM, is that we have absolutely no experience hiring junior engineers. As a matter of fact, there is not one opening for a junior engineer, and we have a pretty robust pipeline to bring people in, people into the organization. And maybe that's where I was thinking, like, could this be because I'm at a big organization? Could I have that?
Yeah.
That could definitely influence it. But at least with the graduates that I have at least found, like, most of the people that I've talked to, I guess some of them may have been junior experiences. Some of them definitely
Yeah.
had some of that, but I found as many people going into mid-level experiences or something where they're jumping in,
Yeah.
where they're not jumping in at an entry level, but they're jumping at some place where they have a different, where they have their professional experiences making
Yeah.
up for what they've had. That's
Well,
where I've seen them be really successful.
what, don't mind me asking, Casey, Kate, Rich, Pierre, like what, those weren't junior positions, or
I
you just
mean,
didn't have a process for junior positions?
no, we have a process for junior positions. I just don't think any of them fit that qualification. Like I don't like because we call I'll have to go back and look at their bands, but I know certainly Michael doesn't fit that. Maybe I'll ask Pierre and Casey if that was the case. I don't believe they were at that level. At least the positions we were hiring for, I believe it was. I believe it was band 7 designation. That's what we call it because we do 6, 7, 8, 9. I believe they were band 7 positions, which would be mid-level in our organization.
Okay. So maybe that's it then, maybe I'm just using the wrong terminology, that, maybe it's not a junior position. Maybe some of the grads that I'm seeing are actually getting jobs that aren't technically junior positions,
Yeah, I mean they're definitely like on board, and that's the language I have heard continuously used with people, and I
Yeah.
heard, like enough to it's like they used almost the exact same phrasing. So I'm like, okay, this is interesting. It's like we're willing to take a chance on you because you have this
Yeah.
experience to go in. So like, I mean, what I've found and when I've got when I've seen is that people coming out of boot camps. So I guess maybe entry level. That's where we have the debate, and that's the part where I'm not sure now. Now I'll have to go check. But I know the area I have not seen anyone succeed. Maybe you've seen different because you see more internships, apprenticeships, that sort of program. I have not seen people be very successful there, at least when they've applied to IBM. But have you seen them be successful?
We very rarely have ever had graduates step into internships.
Mm-hmm.
To be honest, mostly because we've encouraged them that they could get more, recently we had a grad, and man, it's hard to speak with anonymity. So I don't know if this is even going to be possible. So we had a grad who graduated, who stepped into an internship. And honestly, I was thinking to myself, oh, if he would have given another week or two, he wouldn't have had to take an internship. But I think it's great to be able to be at a place where you don't feel like you had the pressure, I would imagine, of like, oh crap, they're going to fire me if I don't do well.
Mm-hmm.
He was one of the best grads we've ever had. And I got a message on LinkedIn from the CEO of his company saying, wow, this guy is amazing. Please send more. And, my honest thought was, man, well, you better hire him and pay him a lot of money.
Right.
Like, I hope you're not like starting a process by, I hope you're not creating a culture where you're starting internship programs so you could pay $15 an hour for someone who should be making like triple that,
Yeah.
So yeah, I haven't seen any kind of much activity at all from our grads, at least with internships, because most of them go after something different,
Yeah, I mean, like, I guess and I'm thinking about, like, what's the best way to guide folks into these sorts of roles and experiences. Actually, because, like, I got it even because I have a specific problem I'm trying to solve, which is, like, have I given you the SRE talk or the Kubernetes talk yet? Discussion around that.
I don't think so.
All right. So I'm a site reliability engineer, or I'm a former site reliability engineer now. And the number one technology that rules my industry is Kubernetes. It is a Docker containerization service that pretty much you go to any major organization, they're running Kubernetes clusters somewhere in their stack. It's prolific. It's 2021. If you go to the Wikipedia page on Kubernetes and look at when was this technology first launched, it was launched at Google the first version release was like 2014. So between 2014 and 2021, and it was, or 2020, I guess, it basically ate the world. It was a bit enough that OpenShift, for at Red Hat, was able to make a amazing piece of product on top of it to go and sell that. So when I look at peers like that are my age or so that have been in the industry for 10 years, it's like, you didn't learn that at school. You didn't learn that anywhere. You learned that through How did you learn that? And the
Yeah.
truth is that there's people who also have experience with this. So you have this weird place where it's like, well, you didn't learn it in school. You have courses online, but you have experience on your resume. So what exactly did you do to be able to get that experience to make it compelling? And the truth is that most people just kind of say they learned it. They learned it through some magic, basically, whatever, or something weird happened, or they learned it on the job, or they picked it up. And it's this very unsatisfying answer, because it feels
Right.
because I get that randomness needs to play a part in this, but for me, it's kind of like, man, these are really good opportunities. I mean, that's the thing. If I can figure out how to harness that, put that lightning in a bottle and hand it to your students, it's like you could get a lot more roles than you're currently getting. But it has to but that's really the final piece where it's like, you need to get experience to be able to do that.
Yeah.
And it's not even, and you need to get experience that's just beyond you doing project work. Usually, again, project work can sometimes make up for it, but again, it's got to be a very good project. So how do you go and be able to get that experience? For me, that's a problem I'm trying to solve, and I don't know how to do it quite yet. Micro experience framework is a way I'm hoping to do it, but maybe there's something else out there.
I think that's 100% doable, because I mean, think about it, like even your story, right? I mean, I don't know your entire, the depths of your story about becoming a software engineer.
We'll talk about that next time.
My podcast. But, I think what I often say to students or folks who are interested in Parsity or something, and they might, name a friend of theirs who's self-taught. Most of the time, these stories are not reproducible, right? They're kind of random. And that's exactly what you're saying with learning Kubernetes or whatever it is. Like they kind of found themselves at the right place, the right time, and kind of randomly learned it. But what I always talk about with Parsity is, this isn't random, right? There's a lot of ways we could do this. I can't prescribe those ways for you. So this is the way I can prescribe. It may not be the way that you want to learn it. Like maybe in an ideal world, you would find yourself working in tech support where somebody takes you under their wing and starts to show you some coding projects and gives you something, and you slowly become a software engineer. But since you don't have that, like, here's a prescribed process. So I think there's a lot of areas in the world where we can surely take things that would be otherwise random and make a prescribed process. As a side note, on a personal level, Growth Space is a company I just learned about through a podcast. They're an Israeli company, and they basically, they're a B2B. They partner with other companies, and they provide mentors and coaches basically on any level or any position in your company. So if you want to have your employees get trained instead of taking online courses or learning something like that, they hook you up with experts. So just kind of another thought for your model of.
Oh my Lord. Yeah. I mean, that's where I'm at right now, where it's like, I'm kind of taking the route where I have no clue what product I want to sell. I have no clue if this is going to be by myself. I'm going to partner with people. So I'm just learning what's out there. And it's just a fascinating space, how many places, just like this microcosm, right? Because you think of this microcosm of not even boot camps, just how do you help people post boot camp make the transition into a career, or just even not boot camp, just I want to learn AI. How do you get an AI? How many people are in that space? It's kind of like you're looking at a part of the sky that looks black and having a microscope there and realizing actually there's a ton of activity there. You just can't see it most of the time.
Well, I don't know if this is related or not, but one of the problems, and you actually posting about this on LinkedIn too recently, one of the problems that this might match up nicely with is the fact that most companies seem desperate to hire senior developers and have no capacity to hire junior developers, right? So I think I made the comment, farming versus mining. Everyone wants to mine for seniors, but no one wants to do the thing where they farm a junior and then the junior leaves and takes a higher salary. You put all the works into you made your crops and someone else is harvesting them. And so I think there's definitely an opportunity to figure out like how do companies train, develop internally. And I think that probably meets a huge need that, my millennial crowd has, is a lot of times we look for jobs, salary, yes, work-life balance for sure, impact, but also growth experience, right? Like we're thinking about like, how will this job help me get the next one and make the next one a good experience? You know, like, where's this on like the path of growth? And so I think if companies just, you know, theoretically here, if companies could figure out how to help people grow, then maybe they could also solve their problem of farming. And if they could farm well, then maybe folks will stick around for a little bit longer. You know, I don't know.
Yeah, that's an interesting problem I saw, you know, and I see there with companies coming in. 'Cause it's not that there isn't a junior development problem. You know, it's not that they don't get that you need junior developers. They get that there are junior developers that they want to bring in. It's almost that problem that when you bring it out to a certain scale, and this is part of me where I'm starting to think that, is massive scale really worth it at the end of the day? Because it seems like massive scale helps with revenue, helps with profit, but does so much more harm to an organization. It kind of feels like, you know, sometimes staying small is good. And like I see in my organization where it's like, God, there's a lot of problems and, you know, a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of problems there. But like, we're almost like trying to use the benefit of the organization, you know, to like, oh, we have recruiters to do this, where it's like, there's a lack of ownership in a lot of these problems. So like, there's a way you can solve this, but then like you off push that to a part of the organization that's less personal, but is supposed to handle that for you. At least I know in my experience, like this is happening live, where it's like, I kind of like, look, when I started off, you know, I just took over as engineering manager for my group. I started off by saying, I need to get another senior person in this role. I need to get a band 8, and I'm going through, and like, I have 2 senior people, you know, on my team, but like, they're not quite there. So I really decided, okay, while I'm trying to find this high senior person, I'm going to invest everything I can into these people. I'm going to grow them. I'm going to give them opportunity. One guy blew out of nowhere, where it's like, 3 months ago, I wasn't sure if he had. Now I'm building the rest of the organization on him. Like, another guy just hired in who was a bootcamp grad is also doing incredibly well, where it's like, this is and so now, like, I'm actually sitting back and reflecting, where it's like, look, I'm having such trouble finding that senior person. I would love to have somebody to influence the organization to come in and basically kick, you know, the guys internally to like get them thinking of new ideas. But at the same time, it's like, I've been so successful growing these guys here. And that's one of the things I care about. I care about the career growth of my guys. You know, even though I have close to 25 direct reports, I will not sacrifice the 1 hour one-on-one. I just will not. I need to have that meeting with them. And it's like, if I can combine that sort of growth, you know, candid, you know, radical candor to actually get that feedback, but do that, like, because guess what? I'm finding band 6, band 7s that I can grow in the organization. Like, I'm finding that, and I'm doing that. And then I'm being successful growing band 7s to band 8s. And I don't have a need for anything higher than that right now. Why don't I so instead of trying to fill that with a role of somebody who's already prepared to fix the organization, why not get another really highly qualified person, maybe somebody from a boot camp, to grow into that? That's like, you're a culture fit. Let's go and grow that. And here's the problem with that approach. No, it's a good approach. It's long, though. It's a long approach, and it's uncertain. That's the big problem, because when you can hire a senior person to the role, you can say, yes, we got him. We got the golden person, you know, to put into the role. Versus like, it's an easy answer. You don't have to describe it to anyone. And it's like, oh yeah, we got this great. Look at their credentials. Look at what they have. Versus like a band 7, it's like, you have to sell them. You have to help with, especially if they're a junior person, you have to sell them communication. Like, I have to, like, it took me a while to convince my manager that these 2 guys were actually the real deal, because it's like, they had communication issues. One of the guys was located out in Guad. The other person was just very quiet. And it's like, he thought there was nothing really there. And it took me like months of saying, no, there's something here. And then finally he went to present. And actually, like, I had my boss's boss send him an accolade basically through our internal system. And it's like, it finally got validated that like he's doing the right thing. So, but that's the thing. If I could get a senior person, I could show how good we are doing. But on the other hand, it's like, man, I don't have that. What I have is junior people, and I have to put in the hours to develop them. That's what I have.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think everyone's in that same conundrum, you know, and it's at the end of the day, it's just problem solving, you know, like, and there's a way to balance, hopefully there's a way to balance and do both. But yeah, I think I think what you're talking about, this idea of helping folks get experience and learn other things, could be part of that solution for sure.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just that idea, because like we're getting to the end of our time here. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. You've been great. Just this idea, because like for me, and I guess this is the master long-term plan. I'm starting with people out of boot camps because I think they're very aware of the issues they have with their,
Sure.
like they don't have a job, so they need to upskill. But like every developer has this problem. Like here, like keep in mind, if you're a sysadmin in 2015, guess what? If you don't learn Kubernetes, you're out of the job very, very soon. If you don't learn good CI/CD patterns, if you don't do that, like you got to move quickly, like the ground
Yeah.
shifting. It's like that person's got a big problem. And then if also, let's say you're really, really ambitious. Let's say you've mastered full stack development, but it's like, man, I want to get a job where I can make reasonably $1 million a year. Like somebody could do something that crazy, or I could join a startup. It's like, well, guess what? You're not going to do that in full stack development. Like the guys who have made crazy amounts of money in full stack development have probably already been minted. There's probably, maybe there's some new guys, but it's going to be very hard.
Yeah.
Versus the guys who are going to make $1 million a year doing blockchain, doing artificial intelligence, building frameworks there, doing stuff in spatial computing. Those guys don't exist yet. We don't know who they are. They may not have even learned the technology. But if you want to go into that, they have the exact same problem, which is you can learn it, you can network with people, but how do you close that feedback loop to actually get real experience?
Right.
How do you build that in your life? To me, that's the problem I really want to solve. Because I want to take your graduates and go and say, you've mastered full stack development. Now throw in something absolutely nuts in your talent stack and see where it can go. Because that's where the amazing opportunities are.
And that's always my philosophy, by the way, is like, to be honest with you, I think in some ways I'm always like hesitant to admit like my deficiencies in terms of programming, but it's that like, I don't necessarily even try and keep up with the latest stuff, and I think it's because at the end of the day, like and we definitely do in terms of full stack development, like we update our stuff all the time, but as far as like hoping to try and teach blockchain, it's not something that's going to be part of like our curriculum roadmap. Probably, I mean, maybe 5 years from now, but
right.
Not in the next year, because I think there's something deeper for beginners to learn, which is building software. And if you can have that foundation, then ideally there's pathways to transition into learning things that right now are more niche. But I think, only time will tell. Like I think a lot of the stuff that we use now that is foundational was obviously once niche. So
right. And there's got much more to get into, but we'll save it for another day. So anyway, Aaron, thank you so much. I didn't even get through my whole list, but this was a great discussion. Thank you for your time. So we'll have a follow-up podcast, and we'll actually do your show next time, so we get to talk and you get to ask me questions. And then honestly, I think we have enough between this and the next one. I think we may have a need to follow up in a few months, or at least continue to talk, particularly that subject of like, okay, now I'm interested in like, okay, so how exactly do you choose your curriculum? Because again, full stack, good. Blockchain, too far in the future. But where does something like SRE fall into the equation? Or like DevOps, or like emerging curriculums where it's like, this is now moving from the realm of future experimental to it's kind of new and fast. Another topic for another time. Really fascinated in your philosophy there. Aaron, thank you so much for your time, and I am super looking forward to our next discussion.
Thanks, Brian. Me as well.